Brianna Reed, a young journalist with an insatiable curiosity, was just about to call it a day when her phone buzzed against her desk. It was an unlisted number, one she hadn't seen before. Intrigued, she answered it, her heart racing with anticipation. A raspy voice on the other end whispered, "If you want to know the truth about Mrs. Ashford, meet me at the Old Town Library after hours. Bring a pen and paper." The line went dead, and Brianna was left reeling. She hesitated for a moment, weighing the possibility of a hoax against the potential for the story of a lifetime. Her editor, Mr. Jenkins, had been pushing her to dig deeper into the mysterious disappearance of Mrs. Penelope Ashford's husband years ago. Brianna knew this could be her big break. With a deep breath, she grabbed her things and hurried out of the newsroom, making her way to the library as quickly as her legs would carry her. As she approached the dusty old building, she could feel the butterflies in her stomach begin to flutter even more intensely. She took a moment to compose herself, straightening her vintage-inspired dress and running a hand through her shoulder-length blonde hair before entering the library. The familiar scent of old books and dust greeted her nostrils, and she made her way through the dimly lit rows, her heart pounding in her chest. Finally, she spotted a figure huddled in the corner, hidden behind a towering stack of tomes. It was the mysterious caller, and he was clutching something in his hand. Brianna's heart leapt into her throat as she approached him. "You wanted to tell me something about Mrs. Ashford?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The figure nodded, revealing a silver locket with a hidden compartment. He opened it, revealing a small key inside. "This," he whispered, "is the key to unlocking her secrets." Brianna's heart raced as she took the locket from the figure's trembling hand. The key seemed to glimmer in the dim light, taunting her with the promise of a story that could change everything. "Thank you," she breathed. "But who are you? And how did you get this?" The man hesitated for a moment before disappearing into the shadows, leaving Brianna alone with her thoughts and the mysterious locket. She couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and fear as she made her way back to the newsroom, the locket hidden safely in her bag. Detective Gray, her regular contact in the police department, was the first person she called. He agreed to meet her at the newsroom, and together they pored over the information she had gathered. They decided that the best course of action would be to pay Mrs. Ashford a visit at her estate, Ashford Manor. As they drove through the gates of the manor, Brianna couldn't help but feel a shiver of anticipation run down her spine. The grand estate was bathed in moonlight, and shadows danced across the sprawling gardens. The detective pulled up to the front door, and they both stepped out of the car, their shoes crunching on the gravel driveway. The air was thick with anticipation, and Brianna knew that whatever secrets lay hidden within the walls of Ashford Manor, they were about to uncover them. They rang the doorbell, and a butler with a starched white collar answered. Brianna and Detective Gray flashed their respective badges, and the butler's face paled. He quickly ushered them inside, leading them through the halls of the manor. The walls were adorned with priceless artworks and antique furniture, but Brianna barely registered any of it. All she could focus on was the sense of foreboding that seemed to permeate every corner of the house. Finally, they arrived at Mrs. Ashford's study. The butler knocked once before opening the door, revealing a woman who looked nothing like the frail, elderly woman she had expected. Mrs. Ashford was sitting at her desk, her face lit up by the flickering flame of a candle. She glanced up at them, her eyes narrowing. "Yes, detective? What can I do for you?" Her voice was cool and composed, but Brianna could see the fear lurking beneath the surface. Detective Gray took out the locket and showed it to her. "We believe this key belongs to you, Mrs. Ashford." Her expression remained unreadable, but she reached out and took the locket from the detective's hand. "Yes, that's mine," she said quietly. "Where did you find it?" Brianna looked at her intently, trying to gauge her reaction. We have reason to believe it may contain information about your husband's disappearance, Detective Gray continued. Mrs. Ashford's face paled, and she closed her eyes for a moment before steeling herself. Very well, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I suppose there is no harm in showing you. She led them over to a bookcase in the corner of the room, revealing a secret door behind it. Inside was a small study, filled with books and papers. This, she said, gesturing to the room, is where I kept my research. My husband's disappearance haunted me for years, and I could not stop searching for answers. Brianna felt a chill run down her spine as she looked around the room, taking in the countless books and notes. It was clear that Mrs. Ashford had dedicated her life to uncovering the truth. As she skimmed through some of the documents, she noticed a pattern emerging. There were references to secret societies, ancient rituals, and a hidden agenda that went far beyond anything she could have imagined. It seemed that Mrs. Ashford had stumbled upon a conspiracy that went deeper than anyone could have guessed. The detective, meanwhile, was examining a series of maps that appeared to depict underground tunnels and hidden chambers beneath the manor. He looked up at Brianna with a grave expression. "This is bigger than we thought," he whispered. "We need to get this information to the right people and fast." Brianna nodded in agreement, her heart racing. She couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility weighing heavily on her shoulders. As they continued to search through the room, they uncovered more and more evidence of the Ashfords' involvement in these secret societies. Photographs of them with high-ranking officials, documents detailing their financial contributions, and even recordings of them participating in strange rituals. It was clear that Mrs. Ashford had been trying to expose the truth, but before she could, something had happened. Her husband had vanished without a trace. The question now was, what had they stumbled upon that was so dangerous? And who was behind it all? "Mrs. Ashford," Detective Gray finally said, "can you tell us what you know about these societies? Who was behind your husband's disappearance?" The old woman looked up at them, her eyes filled with sorrow and determination. "They call themselves the Order of the Serpent," she said quietly, "and they will stop at nothing to keep their secrets hidden." Brianna felt a shiver run down her spine as she heard the name. The Order of the Serpent. It was as if she had heard whispers of them before, in the darkest corners of history books. They were said to be a secret society that had existed for centuries, pulling the strings of power from the shadows. But she had never imagined they were real, let alone that they were involved in something this sinister. Detective Gray leaned in closer, his expression intense. "Can you tell us anything else? Anything at all?" Mrs. Ashford closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath before continuing. "They have a base, somewhere beneath the city. That's where they conduct their rituals and make their plans. I'm not sure where, exactly, but I've done my best to map it out based on the information I've found." She pointed to a series of hand-drawn maps scattered across the desk. "I've tried to find it, to stop them, but I was always too late." Brianna looked at the maps, feeling a sense of dread wash over her. The symbols and markings were strange and foreign, as if they were written in a language she had never seen before. But one thing was clear. They led to a hidden location deep beneath the city. "We need to find this base," she said, more to herself than to the others. "We need to put an end to this." The detective nodded solemnly. "We'll do whatever it takes," he assured her. "Rest assured, Mrs. Ashford, we won't stop until justice is served." With that, they thanked the old woman for her help and left her study, their minds racing with the implications of what they had just discovered. The Order of the Serpent was real, and they were far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The clock was ticking, and the race against time had just begun. Back at the station, Detective Gray and Brianna pored over the maps and documents they had taken from the manor. They studied the strange symbols and markings, trying to piece together the location of the Order's hidden base. After several hours of painstaking work, they managed to narrow it down to a specific location, an abandoned subway tunnel beneath one of the oldest parts of the city. The next day, they returned to the site with a team of police officers and a handful of forensic specialists. They carefully sealed off the entrance to the tunnel, setting up a makeshift command center just outside. With the help of their team, the detective and Brianna began to map out the underground passageways, searching for any signs of recent activity or occupation. As they delved deeper into the tunnel system, they discovered that it had been extensively modified. Brick walls had been torn down, new tunnels carved out of the earth, and strange devices and artifacts littered the passageways. The air grew colder and more oppressive, carrying with it a sense of foreboding and malevolence. Finally, after several hours of arduous exploration, they came upon a massive, ancient-looking door carved from solid stone. It was ornately decorated with symbols of snakes and serpents, and seemed to be barred by some sort of mysterious force. The detective and Brianna exchanged worried glances. They knew that this was it, the heart of the Order of the Serpent, and the place where they would find the truth about what had happened to Mrs. Ashford's husband. With a deep breath, Detective Gray stepped forward and placed his hand against the door. As he did so, the symbols on the door began to glow with an eerie light, and he felt a powerful energy surging through his body. He looked at Brianna, his eyes wide with determination. "I can open it," he said, his voice strained, "but I don't know what we'll find on the other side." Brianna nodded, her heart racing. "Let's do this," she said, steeling herself for what lay ahead. The detective took a deep breath and focused his energy, pushing against the mysterious barrier that held the door shut. With a loud click, the door swung open, revealing a cavernous chamber beyond. The air was thick with the scent of incense and the flickering light of countless candles. In the center of the room stood a large altar, upon which rested a man, his chest bare and his limbs stretched out upon the cold stone. His eyes were open, but there was no life in them. As they drew closer, they could see that his skin was pale and papery, and his veins stood out starkly against it. He was dead, his life force drained away to serve some dark purpose. Around the altar, a group of figures clad in robes adorned with serpent symbols moved silently, their faces hidden behind masks of gold and jade. They seemed to be conducting some sort of ritual, their hands raised in unison as they chanted words that sent shivers down Brianna's spine. The detective took Brianna's hand, squeezing it tightly. "We have to stop them," he whispered. "No matter what it takes." With that, they stepped forward, preparing to face the servants of the Order of the Serpent. The air crackled with tension as they prepared to engage in a battle that would determine the fate of countless innocent lives. As they moved closer, the figures on the altar turned to face them, their serpentine masks glinting in the flickering candlelight. The detective and Brianna exchanged a quick glance, readying themselves for whatever lay ahead. The figures began to chant louder, their voices echoing through the chamber as they invoked dark powers that sent chills down their spines. The air grew thick with the stench of burning incense and the acrid smoke of candles. Detective Gray and Brianna charged forward, with makeshift weapons, a pipe for Brianna, and the detective's service pistol at the ready. The figures on the altar parted like water, revealing a massive snake coiled around the dead man's body. Its eyes glowed with an unearthly light, and its scales shimmered with every shade of green and gold. As they closed in, the snake's head lifted, revealing fangs the size of daggers. The detective and Brianna exchanged another glance, knowing that they were dealing with something far beyond their understanding. The fight was brutal and relentless. The figures in their serpent-adorned robes were skilled warriors, their blows precise and deadly. The detective and Brianna fought side by side, using every ounce of their instinct to stay alive. The air was filled with the clash of steel against steel and the cries of pain and rage. Slowly but surely, they began to gain the upper hand. As they battled their way deeper into the chamber, they noticed that the altar was beginning to glow brighter, as if the snake itself was drawing power from the dark ritual. The figure at the center of the altar, the one who appeared to be leading the ceremony, seemed to be growing stronger as well. The detective knew that they had to stop him before it was too late. With a final burst of strength, they managed to break through the circle of figures and reach the altar. The figure turned to face them, revealing his face beneath the serpent mask. It was Mr. Ashford. His eyes were filled with madness, and his skin was pale and translucent. He laughed maniacally, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You are too late," he whispered. "The time has come for the world to be reborn in darkness." The detective and Brianna exchanged a quick glance, their determination unwavering. They shifted their weapons, preparing for the final showdown. The snake coiled around the altar began to hiss and sway, its body writhing as it sensed the approaching battle. The air grew thick with tension, as if the very fabric of reality itself was about to tear apart. The fight was brutal and intense. Mr. Ashford was quick and agile, his movements unpredictable. The detective and Brianna struggled to keep up, their bodies aching from the exertion of battle. Slowly but surely, they managed to wear him down, their blows finding their marks despite his best efforts to evade them. As they pressed their attack, the snake slithered away from the altar, its movements becoming more erratic and desperate. Finally, with a powerful strike, Detective Gray managed to disarm Mr. Ashford, sending his sword clattering to the floor. He grabbed the man by the throat, their eyes locked in a deadly gaze. "It's over," he growled. "You can't win." Mr. Ashford's eyes widened, and he struggled futilely against the detective's iron grip. Brianna turned her attention back to the snake, which was now writhing wildly on the floor. Its movements were becoming more frantic, its body twisting and coiling as if in pain. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to approach the creature. Suddenly, the snake lunged forward, fangs bared and aimed directly at her heart. With a cry of terror and determination, she leapt out of the way, rolling across the cold stone floor. The fangs narrowly missed her, embedding themselves in the stone instead. The snake's movements grew even more erratic, its body thrashing violently as it sought escape from whatever torment it was experiencing. The detective, still holding Mr. Ashford by the throat, watched the serpent intently, his expression grim. He knew that the ritual could not be allowed to continue. With a swift motion, he drew his gun and fired a single shot directly at the snake's head. The bullet struck true, and the snake's body went limp, twitching once before lying still. The chamber fell silent, the acrid smoke from the candles and incense burning in the braziers the only sound. The figures in their serpent-adorned robes stood motionless, their masks hiding their expressions. The detective released Mr. Ashford, who crumpled to the floor, gasping for air. The man's eyes were wild with fear and despair as he stared at the lifeless body of the snake. "It's over," Detective Gray repeated, his voice firm and steady. "You can't escape what you've done." Brianna joined him, her voice cold and unyielding. "You will face the consequences of your actions, Mr. Ashford." As they spoke, the figure who had been leading the ceremony finally seemed to lose his composure. He threw back his head, laughing hysterically, the sound echoing eerily through the chamber. "You don't understand," he cried. "It's too late for any of us. The darkness has already begun to consume us all." His laughter turned into a maniacal cough, and he doubled over, clutching at his chest. "But," he continued, forcing the words out between ragged gasps, "it doesn't matter. The ritual must go on. The world must be reborn in darkness, and I will be its midwife." With a final, desperate surge of energy, he raised his arms toward the ceiling, his robes billowing out around him like black wings. The figure next to him, dressed in a similar serpent-adorned robe, stepped forward, speaking for the first time since the battle began. "You are wrong, my brother. The darkness has not yet consumed us. It is within us, but it can be overcome. Brianna and I have proven that today." The detective raised an eyebrow, surprised by the other man's words. Brianna realized it was the man who had given her the locket. "You are right," the figure continued. "The ritual must go on. But it must be stopped. The world must not be reborn in darkness." The man who had been called Mr. Ashford wheeled on the speaker, his eyes burning with fury. "Traitor," he spat. "You dare defy me?" He took a step toward the other man, but the figure did not flinch. "I am not defying you, Ashford. I am simply choosing a different path. A path of light." The figure's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath the surface. "Join me, and together we can ensure that the world does not succumb to the darkness." Detective Gray glanced at Brianna, their eyes meeting for a moment. She nodded, her expression grim but determined. Together, they would face whatever came next. The man who had been called Mr. Ashford seemed to sway on his feet, his breath coming in ragged gasps. For a moment, it seemed as if he might actually consider the other man's offer. But then, with a final, desperate snarl, he lunged forward, his fingers curled into claws as he aimed a blow at the figure who had dared to defy him. The detective and Brianna sprang into action, intercepting Ashford's attack and disarming him with ease. The figure who had spoken against the darkness stepped forward, his expression sad but resolute. "Ashford, I understand your anger. I understand the pain and fear that has driven you to this point. But know this. The darkness you serve is not your true master. It is a tool, nothing more. It is within your power to choose a different path, one of light and hope." The figure gestured to the snake, now nothing but a lifeless lump on the cold stone floor. "The serpent has deceived you, as it has deceived so many before. It is time to break free from its grasp." The detective nodded in agreement, his grip on Ashford's arms tightening ever so slightly. "Ashford, you are a powerful man. You have the potential to bring great good into the world. But first, you must confront the darkness within yourself. You must accept responsibility for your actions and find the strength to change." Brianna placed a hand on the man's shoulder, her touch gentle but firm. "Together, we can help you find that strength." Mr. Ashford trembled beneath their hands, his eyes darting back and forth between them. For a long moment, he said nothing, his chest heaving as he struggled to control his breath. And then, finally, he spoke. I don't know if I can." His voice was little more than a whisper. "I've done so much damage." The figure who had spoken against the darkness stepped forward once more, his expression compassionate. "I understand," he said softly. "It is a difficult thing to come to terms with. But know this, you are not alone. We will help you. Together, we will find a way to make amends for your past actions. We will not let you be defined by them." The detective nodded, squeezing Ashford's shoulders gently. "You have the chance to make a difference now," he said. "To turn away from the darkness and walk into the light. It won't be easy, but we'll be with you every step of the way." Brianna placed a hand on Ashford's other shoulder, her touch reassuring. "We believe in you, Ashford," she said. "We believe that you can find the strength to do the right thing." The detective glanced over at the snake, now little more than a mass of black scales on the floor. "And we will make sure that the serpent can no longer deceive or manipulate anyone else." As they spoke, the other cult members were led away in handcuffs, their faces twisted with rage and fear. The detective and Brianna exchanged a knowing glance, aware that their work was far from over. But for now, they had given Ashford a chance at redemption. And that, they knew, was a victory in and of itself. Detective Gray led Ashford to a nearby room, where they could speak privately. The room was spare and cold, with a single table and 2 chairs. As Ashford sat down, His shoulders slumped in defeat. The detective pulled up a chair opposite him. "Ashford," he began, "I know this is going to be difficult for you, but we need you to help us put an end to this. We need you to tell us everything you know about the cult's operations, its leaders, and its plans for the future." Ashford looked up, his eyes filled with anguish. I don't know where to start," he stammered. "There's so much." The detective nodded, understanding. He pulled out a notepad and pen, preparing to take notes. "Just start with what you can remember," he said gently. "We'll take it from there." Brianna waited outside the room, her mind racing as she tried to piece together the threads of the investigation. She knew that there was still much work to be done, but she couldn't help feeling a sense of satisfaction at the progress they had made tonight. Perhaps, she thought, there was hope for Ashford after all. As the detective and Ashford spoke, hours passed. But Detective Gray was relentless, pressing Ashford for information, digging deeper into the dark heart of the cult. Finally, as the first light of dawn crept over the city, Ashford's confession was complete. He had given them everything he knew. The detective leaned back in his chair, his face etched with exhaustion. "Thank you, Ashford," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your courage in facing the truth has saved countless lives. Now it's time for you to begin your own journey towards redemption." Brianna, who had been present for the last part of the confession, nodded in agreement. "You've taken the first step," she said, placing a reassuring hand on Ashford's shoulder. "The next one will be harder, but we'll be here to support you every step of the way." As the detective and Brianna prepared to leave the room, they exchanged a knowing glance. The investigation had only just begun, and the road ahead was long and treacherous. But they were determined to bring the cult's leaders to justice and to ensure that their twisted beliefs would never again find a foothold in society. Outside, the sun was rising, casting a warm glow over the city. The detective took a deep breath, the fresh air invigorating him. "It's going to be a long day," he said, turning to Ashford. "But we're going to need your help every step of the way." Ashford nodded, his expression resolute. "I'm ready," he said, his voice barely audible over the din of the bustling city. "I want to make things right." The detective smiled at him, a look of genuine admiration in his eyes. "Then let's get started," he said, clapping Ashford on the back. "The world is waiting for us to make things right." Together, they stepped out into the bright morning light, their shadows stretching long before them as they prepared to face the challenges that lay ahead. The first order of business was to secure Ashford's safety. The detective arranged for him to be placed into protective custody, away from the prying eyes and vengeful followers of the cult. Ashford was grateful for the gesture, but anxious to help bring the cult's leaders to justice. "There's more you should know," he insisted, his voice urgent. "I can help you build a stronger case against them." Brianna nodded, her expression serious. "We're listening," she said. "Tell us what you've got." As they walked through the city, Ashford began to share more information about the cult's inner workings, their secret rituals, and their plans for global domination. The detective and Brianna listened intently, making notes and consulting with their teams as they went. Hours passed, and they continued to piece together the puzzle. They followed leads to abandoned warehouses, hidden underground lairs, and secretive gatherings in the depths of the city's seediest neighborhoods. With each discovery, they felt a sense of growing determination to bring the cult's reign of terror to an end. Their investigation took them to the farthest reaches of the city and beyond, into the rural areas where the cult had established farms and compounds. There, they uncovered evidence of horrific experiments conducted on the innocent and the desperate, all in the name of their twisted ideology. Ashford's information was invaluable in uncovering these hidden atrocities, and he continued to provide insight and guidance as they pushed deeper into the cult's web of lies. Finally, after weeks of relentless work, they received a tip that led them to the cult's inner sanctum, a heavily fortified compound deep in the heart of the forest. As they approached, they could see armed guards patrolling the perimeter, their eyes alert for any sign of intruders. Detective Gray and Brianna knew that this was it, their last stand against the cult. The assault on the compound was brutal and intense, but thanks to their meticulous planning and Ashford's invaluable intelligence, they managed to breach the defenses and infiltrate the complex. As they fought their way through the compound, they encountered horrific scenes of torture and human experimentation that made their stomachs turn. The cult's leaders, aware of the impending doom, had taken their own lives rather than face justice. In the center of the compound, they found a massive underground chamber filled with computers and data storage devices. Detective Gray and Brianna recognized this as the cult's command center, where they had orchestrated their twisted plans for world domination. They quickly set about searching the room, uncovering a vast network of encrypted files and hidden messages that revealed the true extent of their ambitions. Among the files, they discovered plans for a global pandemic, engineered to wipe out billions of people and leave the cult's chosen few to inherit the Earth. There were also designs for advanced weapon systems and cybernetic enhancements, intended to give the cult an edge over the rest of humanity in their bid for ultimate power. The detective and Brianna were horrified by the scale of the cult's depravity, but they remained resolute in their determination to bring them to justice. As they continued to sift through the mountain of evidence, they began to realize that the cult's reach extended far beyond the borders of their own country. They had established cells and affiliates in every corner of the globe, each one working towards the same diabolical end. Detective Gray and Brianna knew that their work was far from over. They had stopped one branch of the cult, but countless others remained. It would be a long and difficult battle, but they were determined to win it. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it.